In the late 1980s, a Japanese video game developer named Hironobu Sakaguchi was working on a 1990s RPG that was set to be released for dial-up generators, or as the professional name states, the family computer. And throughout development, he treated this project as he did the previous games in the series, choosing to focus on hardware limitations and not surpassing them, alongside overall game design. However, during the development of this game, he encountered loss in the form of his own mother, who tragically died in a house fire which consumed their family's home. This was a horrible, tragic event in his life, and it's one that most of us can't even fully grasp. However, Sakaguchi, through his emotions and his own unique process of healing, began to form the desire to have an audience grasp in a sense the emotion of loss. After this event, he started to reflect on the world around him and what happened to people after they die, and added with the criticisms from past games in the series that the story wasn't important, felt the need to convey both life and death in a single video game. It's not enough to make life the theme. You need to depict living and dying. In any event, you need to portray death. This passion to depict living and dying didn't get translated into the project he was working on at the time, however. As a director, his job was to help make the games possible, not to write them. However, eventually, his need to convey the emotions of life and death did come into fruition 7 years later with the game Final Fantasy VII. Omori Boy is a comic by artist Omocat who created it as a way of coping through her personal problems, finding self-expression to be an outlet for her and utilizing the Tumblr blog to help her navigate those struggles. In every blog post, Omori Boy acts as a mirror to Omocat's emotions and thoughts at the time, whether that be the self-hatred from feeling weak, the wacky antics that she would get up to, or the self-deprecating attitude that she had at the time. Reading this blog is strange because it's very clear that Omocat was not in the best headspace making these posts. However, it was more than likely one of the things in her life that kept her pushing forward and may have even helped save her life and get through her problems in life, later stating that the blog may have helped her move past her depression. Eventually, she realized that she didn't just want Omori Boy to be a self-therapeutic Tumblr blog. She wanted to share her experiences and stories of battling with mental illness on a larger scale, and thus deemed that the best way to tell that story was through video game format. The emotions that she experienced during this period and her passion to express herself through her art, all culminating in Omori, a video game released nearly 10 years later, discussing the mental battles we have with ourselves and our ability to persevere through them. Kentaro Miura is a man who struggled personally while working on his magnum opus series Berserk, a medieval seinen manga about struggle and suffering and the continuous walk through them. This journey being depicted through Guts, a lone swordsman isolated and hyperfixated on slaughtering the demons who ruined his life, and in particular, the dispatching of Griffith, an old friend who caused that ruin in the first place. Berserk is many things. It's called the best manga to ever be written by many, it's controversial, and for damn good reason. Seriously, what the hell, man? But it's also called an inspiring piece of work, partly due to Kentaro Miura's struggles while making it. Miura describes the isolation and blinded obsession with making manga, doing anything to capture those goals of perfection to mask his insecurity, and depicting those struggles through Guts and his single-minded obsession fueled by hate, alongside his quiet and somber loneliness and feeling of disbelonging in this world. Something that would change when Miura started putting the manga on frequent hiatuses to break free from the chains of obligation he slipped on when making Berserk. Guts' character arc started to change, a once lonely, anger, and bitter human being opening up to those around him once more and letting his dream of revenge slip away, not out of forgiveness but out of the necessity to move on with his life and forge forward a new journey. And this only happened because Miura himself started to live for himself rather than his dream and enjoy his time left here before he tragically passed away in 2021, an event that would not only impact the seinen sphere, but the foundation of media as a whole. Through Guts, through Berserk, Kentaro Miura depicted his struggles but also depicted his determination to move on with his life before sacrificing it for his dream. And man, seeing Miura's journey change the direction of the manga in real time alongside the manga changing Miura's journey in real time, it's something I really like to reflect on when reading Berserk, because I think it makes his story, Berserk, show very plainly the kind of person Miura was and how he developed as a person throughout his life, and honestly, I think that's what helps make Berserk so impactful. Alright, all that to say, I need an answer. Why was that goat's penis a snake? Now, I have already made a video on Final Fantasy VII, on Omori, and a little bit of Berserk in its more surrealistic nature, so I do not intend for this to be a video where I go, "This is why Tifa's cowboy hat holds a major significance to the story about the life of the planet and why I would happily suck on her toes." Rather, I want to point out one of the many reasons why I think these three titles are awesome, and that is how much Hironobu Sakaguchi, Omocat, and Gentaro Miura's emotions were interwoven into the narrative. Final Fantasy VII wasn't the first time a party member died in a mainline Final Fantasy game at all. However, it was handled with so much maturity and had such a presence in the overall narrative that it felt like it was. Omori's topics of depression and anxiety aren't anything new for an indie title, but are told in such a genuine way that by the time the credits roll, you're crying, seriously, this crap ain't fair. Berserk details suffering in the most heinous aspects of humanity, but it also shows our ability to still struggle further and further against the horror that can be found within every inch of the world we inhabit, and how beautiful this world can be regardless of that horror. And this is what I want to go on a long schizo rant about today, about times when the lines between the creators of something and their creation become blurry and even almost invisible. Throughout the past handful of years, I have become enamored with looking into the behind the scenes of each piece of media, the decisions that inspired ideas, and the real world narratives of people behind the stories of these creations and how they played a part in their portrayal of the same emotions they experienced themselves. I'm naming this video When Artists and Their Art Become Inseparable. However, that implies I'm just talking about people that know how to draw, which that is partly what we are going to be talking about today. However, in a greater sense, I want to reflect on media in which you can feel the creator's soul and philosophies burning through the very edges of their work. Pieces of media that contain a story behind them and become even more powerful after learning about the personal stories of the people that made them. And so, if you're cool with that, I want to invite you to join me in this examination of art and the relationship the people behind them have with their work. And so, I want to start it off right with a talented artist, musician, and visionary. Let's talk about a dude that ate his pet goldfish.
Dude, that's me?
The sky's the limit for my artwork too.
Bet if I pull out all the stops and try super hard, it'll be a piece of cake.
What?
Tatsuki Fujimoto, if you cannot tell by the previous sentence, is somebody akin to an individual who should be held in an asylum, an individual who as a person is unhinged and whose work reflects that insanity in a way unique to himself. Fujimoto has made it very clear, whether that be in interviews or random videos of him trying to levitate on YouTube, that he is a very strange man, the kind of strange man that impersonates his fictional little sister online, votes for characters he hates in popularity contests, sings crappy songs, and gets turned on when a woman pushes his bike over, driving him to the realization that he likes dominant women. Fujimoto is a weird dude, and most of the things he has admitted to doing without any pressure, I would not even imply if Batman was beating me with a bicycle handle. However, the reason why I bring up Tatsuki Fujimoto is because this level of zaniness and bizarre personality traits doesn't just get explored through interviews with him, but most prominently in the manga he creates. His two most popular mangas as of now are Chainsaw Man and Look Back, both of which got anime adaptations out there right now, and here you can even see in his most grounded work, Look Back, his take of making bizarre instances in manga and how he uses that weirdness to tell a point. Look Back is a simple, grounded story about two teenagers making it big as manga artists, something that many children in Japan can relate to aspiring to being. However, manages to also detail the toll and detachment that manga can bring to an individual, Fujimoto likely being someone who went through those same emotions throughout his time as a mangaka. However, instead of depicting that normally like any other mangaka, he uses the possibility of multiple timelines to convey that story, something that didn't really need to be done, but manages to make the message of the manga stand out a lot more in this weirder, more tonally drastic way. You can also see this in Chainsaw Man, a manga which is growing stranger and more unhinged by each chapter. Seriously, what the heck are you cooking, Heartman? However, the cool part with part 1 of Chainsaw Man is that you can actually connect the dots of a previous experience he had in his life to a thematic element of Chainsaw Man, that being the character of Makima. Remember how I told you about Fujimoto's experience with that chick pushing over his bike with him being into that? Well, Makima is that kind of individual, a controlling, dominant, and ultimately manipulative woman that Denji falls head over heels for immediately. However, Fujimoto also explains how dangerous a person like this is, despite the fact that this woman is his type. Makima is a highly dangerous individual, and for those mad at me, that's not a spoiler. She shows the Yakuza their eyeballs of their loved ones. Do you expect her to be a good person? I'm sorry, but nah, bro. However, he also uses this character to help Denji stand out in his very own very strange way. Denji's ultimate goal ranging from simple intimacy to I want to touch boobs, then I want to have sex, all of these strange and unhinged goals coming from a place of loneliness and poverty, just wanting the simple pleasure of experience intimacy, and that's as far as I can go without spoilers. But Fujimoto is a man who paints his life experiences into his manga, and although they are dramatized to the extreme, and in the case of Fire Punch are twisted beyond human comprehension, I think the weird writing from Fujimoto is a result of his bizarre qualities as a person, and the way he writes that in his work to reflect himself while also painting a picture of realization through that insanity is something I haven't seen done as well before or since Fujimoto entered the manga scene. That is what makes his work so appealing. He writes about things in the most surreal way possible, but manages to detail the simplicity of human emotion alongside the grounded and heart-wrenching reality of our world through that surrealism. Tatsuki Fujimoto is a strange example of an artist who is inseparable from their art. There isn't a single event in his life that he makes the central theme of his stories. Instead, he takes his own weird perspectives of death and fulfillment and implements them into his stories by having those perspectives be depicted in a similar fashion to how he came to that realization himself. The choice of having Denji be this starving, broke teenager that would do anything for money wasn't an idea he came up with so that Shonen Jump wouldn't cancel his manga. It's a perspective he himself formed while jump roping across the line of stability and poverty while he was a teenager. Denji's journey from a teenager who wants a normal life to a guy who learns to dream being a reality that I can imagine Fujimoto experienced himself. You can also see this form of self-expression through the creation of other projects as well, however, one of those being Team Silent. Team Silent was a studio that was made of people that did not fit into other developmental factions in Konami and were outcasted as developers, and eventually even Konami lost faith in their efforts to make a horror game, resulting in them creating this oppressive and in-your-face, unnerving and unwelcoming horror title, as if they were saying with this game, we exist, we matter, and this is our protest. All of the weird methods of horror that they used at the time revitalizing and popularizing not just the game but the genre, Silent Hill becoming one of Konami's most famous and neglected properties. I bring Fujimoto and Team Silent up to state that in many instances, the artists behind these projects don't convey their life experiences into their work in the way that Sakaguchi or Miura did, but instead use their emotions as fuel to construct the pillars of these projects. Fujimoto might have met a girl that bullied him, but he wasn't thrown into outer space, trapped in hell, or exploited. At least I certainly hope not, and if he was, then this litter of baby kittens are all his as a form of condolence. Actually, hold up, that's not the best idea. He might eat them when they die. But I'm sure he felt the same kind of dissociation that Denji feels in Part 2, or the hopelessness Agni feels in Fire Punch. Team Silent didn't have to get lost in a haunted town or have an accident revolving around pillows, but I'm sure that after years of not being believed in and left behind, that they felt like they were trapped in their own corrupted minds, their own Silent Hill. Life experiences fuel art, but so do emotions, and what I really appreciate about both Fujimoto and the team behind Silent Hill is that they allowed their form of self-expression to be free and at the forefront rather than something they contain and control. Art is the result of self-expressionism and the emotions that come from that, and that's what makes the art itself so important at all in the first place. It is a reflection of those who made it, and another instance where you can eerily see the artist's story, and in this case perspective of acceptance in the face of death, is in director Katsuro Hashino's game, Persona 3. Okay, so before I continue on, I should say that for most of this video, I will be keeping spoilers to an absolute minimum, and continuing past this section, I will continue to do so, only spoiling early parts of each story and maybe the themes associated with them. However, with Persona 3, it is kind of impossible to discuss in this context without spoiling the entire game, so what I am going to do is leave a timestamp on screen for you to jump if you want to avoid spoilers for Persona 3. Thanks for stopping by, this is the only time I will be doing this. Okay, let's continue on. Recently, while writing this video, I finished Persona 3 Reload for the first time, and it was a really great game with a pretty good story and lighthearted characters and fun combat and great music, and that ending was really nice and sad and crap. I'm crying, seriously, who made the ending so sad? Why is this the good ending? The tears won't stop. Persona 3 is a game that is fascinating in many areas. A game created right when Atlus was on the verge of collapsing, a game that laid the groundwork for the remaining Persona titles that have come out in recent years, and also a game that ripped my soul out of my chest, pissed on my heart, and then was like, don't cry, here's Yubi Kawamura. You see, for those unaware, Persona 3's primary theme is the idea of death, something that is introduced at the very beginning of the game. Our protagonist moving throughout the train station on his way to Tatsumi Port Island while we see flashes of a girl pointing a firearm to her head, seemingly attempting to take her own life. The idea of death is something that is always present, both in the gameplay loop, summoning your persona in this game requiring you to face death in the face and shoot yourself in the head, as well as in the story and how it depicts these moments of being at the end of one's life and the way their loved ones deal with their loss. Excluding the deaths that happen before the game takes place, we are forced to watch this cast of characters lose people and deal with the idea of death constantly. Shinjiro Aragaki, a team member and close friend of Akihiko, is shot dead, Ken feeling responsible due to him leading him there with the intention of killing him in an act of revenge over his mother's accidental death at his hands, planning to take his own life shortly afterwards. Mitsuru's father, fatally injured defending Seas from Ukutsuki, bleeds out in his daughter's arms. Chidori, the first person Junpei learns to truly love as she is and truly care for, gives up her own life to save his. Ryoji has to come to terms with the fact that he is essentially dead on arrival due to his role as the appraiser of the end. And lastly, the protagonist, we pass away due to our sealment of Nyx in the lap of someone who has learned what it means to be human. In every instance, these people have to come to terms with the idea of death both for themselves and the people they care about, due to Nyx being this deity that will transform that existential fear into a reality if not dealt with miraculously, but also of death for those who have passed on and how they choose to deal with it. Persona 3 is focused on the mere idea of dying, yes, but is primarily focused on the effects it has surrounding the people that continue on. Akihiko feels like he has failed after Shinji's death, not being able to save his sister and now someone he also considered his brother. Mitsuru is immediately thrust into the responsibility of honoring her father's legacy and becoming the head of the Kirijo group, while still processing that the person she wanted to protect from the shadow she has been fighting for years now died at the hands of a human and does not know what she is fighting for anymore. Junpei has to come to terms with the fact that Chidori loved him and that there will be a void in his heart forever, but that he cannot waste his life simply because Chidori sacrificed her own to save his. And the others will have to somehow figure out a way to deal with the death of someone they considered their leader and, most importantly, their friend. But even with all of this death and suffering and the regrets the people that live on have to carry, I don't think any of this is unintentional or something that was made in a boardroom. In a 2012 interview with director Katsura Hashino and art director Shigenori Sojima, Hashino brought up how he got so sick one time that they were calling his relatives to say goodbye, and that his wife stayed next to him the entire time. Whether out of desperation to cling to what she thought were her last moments with him or to be there to comfort Hashino, the event ended up affecting his thought process. He felt no pain, he saw his wife by his side, and thought to himself, it wouldn't be so bad to die like this. This entire situation very eerily showing through the ending of Persona 3. And there's something strangely intimate, not just with how each character deals with loss, but also how the people whose book ends accept it with a smile. Shinjiro leaves his last words and states that this is how things should be. Chidori dies in Junpei's arms, looking back fondly on the few months with him that gave her life meaning and strengthened her will to live. And the protagonist dies knowing that he fulfilled his promise and that his friends did the same. However, it's only when it's our turn to pass on rather than watch another do the same, that's when it's painted as beautiful and peaceful, and I don't think it's portrayed this way simply because of the fact that this is the game's ending. I think that Shinjiro saw something beautiful in his death as well. I think Chidori, while looking into Junpei's eyes, saw her world flourish around her, and I think that when it was finally the protagonist's turn to pass on, that we manage to find that same sense of beauty for the last time. And I hope that when we, as real human beings, die, that we find the beauty in our final moments as well. That we remember to cherish the memories of others that we have, and that, as Aiga says in her final words to the player, that the only thing we need to give our life's purpose is someone to care about. Now, I should state that Hashino placed this near-death experience of his around 5 years ago, it being unclear if that was 5 years before Persona 3 was released or 5 years predating the 2012 interview, which would nullify this entire section. However, I think that even without this piece of trivia, Hashino's perspective of death and not being able to do everything possible and how that gives our lives meaning is something that I think is an important message that he wanted to share either way. Death is a reality that will come for us all at different points in people's lives, but what we do in the moments beforehand can make us appreciate the beauty in death itself. So Jima then stated that he had an Ayo the Pizza's Hero moment and fell down the stairs as his near-death experience, and thus we transition to Takahiko Inoue. Can you tell tone consistency is not my highlight? Takahiko Inoue is a master of his craft, and that's not something I am saying to introduce this guy. That is something other mangaka have declared. Oda, the creator of One Piece, following his work delicately ever since his early days, and Toriyama, creator of Dragon Ball and one of the people who popularized shonen, stating that what Inoue had was not just sheer effort but talent, almost as if he was born with the skill of illustration, a talent that nobody else could be born with, and that talent shows. Ever since his earliest serialized manga, Chameleon Jail, which he did the art for at 22, he's always had a way of detailing expressions on a person's face, whether that be shock, anger, or farming, or sadness. One of those might not be a real emotion. But as time had gone on, that talent had grown, and so had his eye for perfection. Throughout his work on Slam Dunk, Buzzer Beater, Reel, and what I'll be choosing to focus on today, Vagabond, the amount of delicacy he used with his art and storytelling grew to the point in which his work no longer looked like a panel in a manga, it looked like something you would see in an art museum, something he would actually delve into as well later on in life. However, the reason why I am talking about Vagabond, arguably his most well-known series, is because, well, I haven't read Slam Dunk yet, please don't yell at me in the comments, but also because I think Vagabond is Inoue's realization of the cost of perfectionism and how he chooses to depict this through his take on Miyamoto Musashi and his journey to become invincible under the sun. Shinmin Takuzo is a hostile man. At 17 years old, he has proven himself as an antisocial person, not having many friends or someone to care for him, and one who, after surviving the Battle of Sakigahara, is feared by Miyamoto Village, the place he grew up, due to his extremely violent and savage tendencies that he has had since he was a child. And after being declared as a criminal due to his only friend Marahachi being missing in their perspective, who in actuality is just getting in some damn good cardio, is forced to begin a new life as Miyamoto Musashi, a swordsman wanting to achieve his lifelong goal of being invincible under the sun. Vagabond's following chapters primarily focus on Musashi's challenges against renowned swordsmen all over the country in his hopes to become the strongest, and immediately Vagabond, for me at least, became one of, if not my favorite manga I have read so far, and I think part of that is because of how carefully crafted the world and its characters are. What I have just described is a very brief and cheapened explanation of the first 2 volumes of Vagabond, and I need you to understand right now, if you have never read Vagabond, that I just butchered the story. Inoue in these opening chapters perfectly sets the tone of the story and introduces every vital reappearing character in this section of the story, and establishes those characters to the point of where you truly care for them within panels of their introduction. Takuzo/Musashi is introduced as a survivor of a war and one whose aggression is put on display instantly, but also his willingness to care for others that has cared for him in the past. Marahachi, Takuzo's childhood friend, is shown as a coward but one that wants to follow in the footsteps of Takuzo. Otsu is introduced as Marahachi's fiancé who is left devastated after realizing that he has left her for someone else, but still through her grief manages to comfort and console Takuzo and confide in him about her feelings of betrayal and grief. Inoue's introduction of key characters and the establishment of their personalities and ideals are done in a way that makes them feel human and real, choosing to depict these moments of raw emotion and intimacy in a way that takes time but also provides meaning and insight into these characters. One of my favorite instances of this being the fight between Musashi and Sakashusai Yagyu, the head of the Yagyu clan. This fight, rather than being one fought with swords and skill, is instead fought with the inner turmoil that Musashi feels about cutting this once renowned swordsman, now elderly man down just to prove to himself that he is, realizing that his anger and fear of his abusive and violent father is the source of his animalistic qualities and ultimately driving his single-minded obsession with becoming invincible. And when faced with this man and reflecting on those painful memories, begins to understand that he does not understand what it means to be invincible, about what it means to be the strongest. And this elderly man before him tells him simply that invincible is only a word. Takahiko Inoue is a perfectionist, similar to how we all are in a semblance, and you can see this everywhere, from his earliest artistry in serialized manga with Chameleon Jail all the way to the only series he is consistently working on at the moment, Real. However, with Vagabond, every single panel is depicted in such a way that explores the human condition. Every sword swing, every moment of impact, every kill at the hands of Musashi feels refined to the point of where some panels outside of the violence and bloodshed, when our protagonist walks slowly or stands still, that is often where we get these panels of sheer artistry, of serene perfection. However, this perfection often comes at a cost. Vagabond, in my opinion, has some of the prettiest art of any manga, any art in general that I've ever read. However, there is a documentary following Inoue's work on Vagabond and the process of creating a chapter, and in a portion of this documentary, it follows Inoue's process of making a panel special to him. Inoue's singular goal being to depict Musashi's desire to prey, something that is foreign to the character, and while most artists would just draw the panel and move on to the next, well, Inoue is obsessed to the point of exhaustion. This is a man who is running on minimal sleep, whose deadline is coming up rapidly, and whose singular goal is to perfect and capture this emotion. And the wild thing is, when he finally completes that panel, he doesn't say that it is perfect, he doesn't say it is to his liking, he just says that it is correct. Look at this panel, look how beautiful this panel is and the emotion captured in it, and to know that Inoue doesn't even think he captured the emotion the way he wanted, that's what is crazy to me about this. Inoue's perfectionism surrounding this series and the worst part of humanity, alongside the journey to become something more, took a toll on his health and his body, but also his spirits, his only way out, choosing to reflect those emotions of perfectionism and invincibility through Musashi and his slow realization of what being invincible truly means. This year, Vagabond has been on hiatus for 10 years, Inoue taking an indefinite pause to collect himself and work on Real, something he has been doing ever since, and I think we need to learn to accept that we may never get another chapter of Vagabond again. I think the closest thing we will get to an ending is the manga expedition that he made surrounding the scenario where Musashi is an elderly man himself and passes away, and honestly, who knows if that's canon or not, or if for Inoue it was him closing the book in his life that was his journey making Vagabond. However, I think it's so beautiful that alongside Musashi, he realized what perfectionism alongside invincibility is. That it is only a word, but in this instance, why? Why would you do this to yourself to make something that you are proud of? Inoue's health declined while making this series just to capture the story of Miyamoto Musashi in his frame of perfection. Musashi had several near-death experiences and sacrificed his own wishes of peace and connection for the sake of achieving invincibility, but it only took a toll on him. Sure, they both learned lessons that helped them grow, but I don't know. When I watched this documentary and specifically this portion of Inoue's life, I wondered, why does Inoue do this to himself? Why not just draw the panel and move on with the other parts of your work? Why spend so much time hyperfixated on this single panel to the point of exhaustion? What makes him and others like this care so much about what they are creating and what they are making that it in some areas destroys them? What brings us to suffer at the knees of our creation? In every work I brought up and will continue to bring up, you can see that making these things is difficult and often takes a toll on the individuals behind its lives. We discussed Inoue's obsession with perfection and how it took a toll on his mental and physical well-being. However, Fujimoto has also been someone who's worked himself to the bone by making manga. The lack of assistance he has currently while making manga, the breaks he frequently does so that he can have time to make the next chapter, and the inconsistency in page number occurring frequently not because he doesn't care, but because he has nothing left in his system to keep refining it over and over again, showing the amount of work and effort he has been putting in. Team Silent worked tirelessly on Silent Hill, and I'm not just saying that to connect the dots. Takayoshi Sato was the sole character designer and CGI movie creator, meaning that every single CGI cutscene in the game made via unrefined technology was all single-handedly handled by Sato, the man spending tireless weeks in the studio just to create them. Katsura Hashino had to spend his time managing the development of what was possibly their last game at Atlas, and Inoue, and to cycle back around, Kentaro Miura sacrificed their health and even their life dedicating it to making manga. All of these people, some more than others, had to suffer while creating something they were passionate about. Creativity is freeing, but it is also difficult, and no matter who is behind it, it can be soul draining, especially so if they truly, honest to God, care about what they are creating. Something I think is plainly obvious with every single person in their story that we have covered so far today. But it's not like these guys are just stubborn or have nothing better to do or are submitting an assignment for a grade. If it was just something that needed to be finished and released, Fujimoto wouldn't take so many break weeks, which is an often well-known death sentence for shonen manga. Takayoshi Sato, alongside the other handful of other people, wouldn't spend years with minimal sleep and camaraderie formed through loneliness working on a video game they realized nobody believed in. Inoue wouldn't spend days drawing the same panel again and again until it was perfect, unless they cared about their work. Look, every person watching this was a kid once, and depending on the person might still be one, but as a kid you learn to create things, whether that be Legos or Hot Wheel tracks, drawings of your family and your imaginary friend Brian, or Coco Melon lyrics. I don't know what children do for fun nowadays. We all created something that we spent time and effort into, not because we were instructed to do so, but because we wanted to create things and we wanted them to be to our liking, whether or not it was good or not. And I think that with every story we have discussed today, that it's the same for them, that the childhood creativity that they had as kids developed into their lives later on as well to tell these stories. And like we did as children, we want them to be to our liking, and unfortunately, we are all insecure little perfectionists in some way. Drawing after drawing, draft after draft, we are all just trying to express ourselves through our arts in the most human, authentic, and purposeful way we possibly can. And I don't think it's because we require attention and approval like we did when we were still developing. I think it's because the biggest audience and the person we want to please the most is ourselves. You are your own worst critic. You've heard that more times than you have probably ever wanted to. However, I think it rings true because while sure, criticism from others can be damaging, I don't think it's what causes people to suffer for their work like this. Inoue didn't release the chapter with that panel, yet I'm confident every assistant and person that saw what he was drawing thought it looked great. Omocat's blog post felt sincere, but I wonder if she ever doubted herself when she hit upload on some of these images, if she was worried about how people would react to the letters she compiled alongside this drawing. Now, as a random side note, I also found out she's not exactly the best person. We suffer at the knees of our own creation, not to please others, but to please our own desire of perfectionism, or in another way, mask our own insecurities about our own creations. Hell, you're seeing an example of that now. With these videos, I try to polish them and make them something that I want to watch myself, that I would enjoy if I found that video in my For You page. However, that also leads to this endless chase of making something better, even if the effort put in is shown in the most minute details that only I would notice. And I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but I get it. I get why these people suffer at the knees of their work, and even though it's taxing, even though it takes forever, I want to suffer for my art too. I would like to talk about Hyper Light Drifter now. Hyper Light Drifter is an indie game made by Rosentwig, a small indie studio that after a successful Kickstarter campaign released in 2016, and as a video game, it's great, man. The gameplay is a strategic blend of timing and reaction, and it requires you to always contemplate what you are doing, the difficulty surrounding the game, and its 4 landscapes creating the world that the protagonist, the Drifter, explores. And dude, I really like this game. The combat and boss battles are so much fun and provide a good amount of player expression, and this world is just beautifully designed. The chosen pixel art SNES-like aesthetic, painting this post-apocalyptic and ravaged world in a serene and comforting beauty that to this day remains unique to itself in my opinion. This is a game that just freaking rocks, aside from when I am fighting these plant choppers from hell! Hyper Light Drifter as a video game is a blast, and one of my hopes is that anybody watching this that hasn't given this game a try does so. However, what takes this game from simply a great action-adventure title to something more is the creator Alex Preston's lifelong battle for his life and how it influences the story of Hyper Light Drifter. Alex Preston is a person who had grown up playing video games and used that to bond with his family and friends. However, he's also an individual who suffers from a congenital heart disease and has battled with it throughout his entire life. And while according to his cardiologist, he's like a walking dark comedy, able to make light of any situation, including his health as shown in a brief 7-minute documentary, it's also something that I guarantee haunts him as well. Hyper Light Drifter in a way being the depiction of his battle with his disease and the nihilistic turns it has taken him. Hyper Light Drifter's story follows the Drifter, who explores this game's world in search of a cure for his illness, constantly living on the edge of death, having visions of his greatest fears in which he simply drops. No drama, no horror, just an instant nothingness. The Drifter coughs up blood at random points as he desperately tries, searching for something, anything, to extend the time he has left, and this game, if anything, is a depiction of how Alex Preston probably feels in his day-to-day life. Hyper Light Drifter being a game made by someone who loves video games and made by someone who fears that they may not be able to finish their own. He wanted to tell a story he could identify with and express the personal emotions and fears that he had with people around the world. And I think that's beautiful, you know, because here I am sharing that story about the connection between his work and his life and emotions and how the two meld together. Separated, Hyper Light Drifter is a great game and Alex Preston's story is a sad one, but together they meld to form something unique and beautiful. And to be honest, I think that's also kind of what makes human creation so beautiful. The fact that there are stories behind every single piece of media, whether good or bad, there's a story behind every single creation made. Whether made up in somebody's imagination to convey the emotions they often feel, a real story they experience that they want to convey, or the frustrations in actively making that story that they suddenly feel the need to actualize in the narrative. Human creation is made up of building blocks that come from the soul of that person, or even several people for that matter, and what I think is so bewildering is that we are slowly sacrificing that beauty into the hands of people who could not care about their art, and most tragically, AI. That's correct, this was a rant about AI this whole time and you're too far in to stop watching now! This is something that is a little difficult to talk about. On one hand, I don't think I stand in any position whatsoever in which I can rant about other people using art as a form of profit and selfishness rather than a passion, because man, I can barely call myself an artist at all. I go on long schizo rants about whatever I'm feeling, and I am lucky enough to have people that want to listen. And I think this is something that has been going on for so long and has been touched on by so many other people that anything I have to add would just reiterate the same points, creating an echo chamber. However, what I will say about creators that make art out of selfish gain or exploitation rather than genuine passion and love is this. The line between these artists and their art are still inseparable, but only in a way that points out their soulless lack of passion, or even worse, the reprehensible actions they are willing to take to have that art be seen, desperate for others to simply see their art, not caring about the reactions or even their own opinions about something they spent their time making. However, even with the lack of care that goes into these creations, the sheer display of passionless creation that comes alongside that, I would much rather consume that passionless piece of art made by a human being rather than the soulless generation of art that AI brings. AI has always been a very dystopian concept. The idea of something other than a human being gaining consciousness being scary because of the unknown thought process and experience that AI is faced with, something that humans will never understand because of their humanity. When AI first came out, it was very flawed. I think everyone who's had the attention span to last this far into the video remembers the first iterations of what it would call art. Flimsy, soulless videos that only exist to be laughed at and made fun of. However, over time, it changes, it learns, and it adapts. Why pay someone to make something when I can just generate what I want via a robot for free? And that's always been a looming fear for very talented, passionate artists, and the unfortunate part is that this is no longer a dystopian fear to have, but a relevant one. You can read several stories of people being laid off in favor of AI, and that is really depressing to read. However, now it's getting to the point of where it's not just corporations using AI for their own greed. It's everyday normal people. A couple months back, there was a trend where people would use an AI filter transforming their photos into the Studio Ghibli art style, a studio which spends years perfecting their style and work in animation to create a vibe fit for all ages and people, a studio whose animation qualities are arguably the most unique in the industry. And here are photos of people simply asking AI to generate that style without any effort or soul involved, rather than commission real artists to put that soul into the picture. And the sad thing is, people are okay with it. While this was going on, there was a 2016 clip of co-founder of Studio Ghibli Hayao Miyazaki stating that AI work utterly disgusted him and that he felt like it was an insult to life and creativity itself. And I can understand someone maybe watching this video asking, well, why? Why is it that people feel this strongly against AI art? It can create similar things as real artists. Sure, maybe it doesn't do as clean and precise as a job, but it does its job fine, and what it does well, it does well. And the only question I have for someone that maybe thinks this is, one, have you even been watching this video? But two, can you find a single story like the ones we have discussed today behind a piece of art made by AI? Can you find AI perfecting its craft over and over again out of perfectionism when creating art? Can you see the soul of AI conveyed through its story? Can you witness a narrative that it has experienced thrown into a piece of work that it has created? No, you cannot, because with AI, there is no story behind anything it creates. It cannot even begin to function without a human being giving it a prompt, and even when that does not become the case anymore, all it is doing is generating things based off of something that a human has created, bastardizing it in the process. And I don't think AI creation is something that is disgusting because of the lack of soul, because eventually its work will feel like it has a soul. A couple weeks back, I saw a post involving a ton of cosplayers at an event dressed as their favorite game characters, and I thought it was awesome, man. These people were having a blast. Smiles coated the screen, competitions were held, conversations had, relationships formed, and yet not a single pixel I was looking at was real. I didn't even realize it was AI until people in the comment section pointed it out, and that's terrifying, but it is an inevitability. The criticism of AI art feeling soulless will eventually fall to pieces when AI learns to replicate to the best of its ability how to generate something that has a soul. It won't be able to, but it will try regardless, and it may feel like it very well succeeded. While I was writing this video, Google Veo 3 came out allowing audio to be generated, and well, look at this, man. It is flawed a little bit. These videos look a little too clear and smooth, and certain movements look off, but these are things that it will learn to improve, not out of its own perfectionistic insecurities, but because it's the only thing it knows how to do. The only thing that we are going to be able to do about that is recognize the difference between creation and generation. Creation is the art of pouring your soul into something no matter how much or little of it you pour, spending your time envisioning, designing, refining, and creating the piece of art you want. That is a creation, a form of self-expression, and it is something only we humans are capable of doing. Generation is none of that. It is the simple process of running a code through a prompt and coming up with an answer to that prompt. No story, no emotions, no form of self-expression because there is no self to express. Nothing involved except a prompt by a human to actualize. A creation of art is not just the finished result, it is the hours of thought and work put in to result in a creation that, whether shared by other people or not, will only see the result of it. This video you are watching now is a video that for you is just a form of entertainment by another human being, and I want to say thank you so much for allowing this thing to fill your time and for you to be willing to watch this thing. However, what's behind this video is hours of scripting, recording, editing, and refining this video that you are watching right now and make this as good good as I possibly can. And while that doesn't change the final product you are watching now, that's what makes this a creation. It is the fact that it was made by a person, another human being like yourself, that expressed himself through his work. AI, it can't do that. It doesn't understand what perfectionism is. It doesn't understand how to convey true emotion or soul into its work because it doesn't understand what those things are. Its only basis is what it can gather from humans online. And that's why I think it's so important that humans create art, that we don't sacrifice one of our only forms of self-expression towards something that cannot express itself at all, even if it was designed to desire to do so. Ultimately, the reason why I wanted to make this video is not to add to the discussion of AI or talk about the horrifying possibilities surrounding creativity and how it can be sacrificed in favor of ease, but to just express how beautiful art is. Every single piece of media we have covered today has a story behind it. However, every piece of media that has been made that has a single ounce of passion behind it has a story behind it, even the ones whose stories lie in darkness not to be unveiled towards others. The truth is, there is no win to artists in their art and the point when they become inseparable. There is only artist and art and how they are inseparable. Every single creation has a person behind it, and whether or not it was intentional, their emotions, their stories, their lives, their frustrations, their efforts, their insecurities come into being through their creations. And that's something that I don't think we should erase or be ashamed of, because that's how truly beautiful art is formed, by humans. That line between the two, between human and their creation, it's transparent because there is no line to begin with. We leave a part of ourselves with the stories we tell, and whether that be a certain mangaka that conveys their philosophies and emotions into their stories, a game developer that wishes to share their battles with illness to others, or a man conveying the grief of losing a mother, I think that line being invisible is what makes art so profound. Hello there, friendly strangers on the internet. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate the patience with me while I was working on this, as I had some things come up that I had to prepare for, and I hope you enjoyed your time here today. The last video felt very somber and depressing, so it was nice to try and find a balance with this one. Speaking of that last video, dog, how? The video on memories did really well, and not only that, but the channel didn't just surpass 1,000 subs because of it. Y'all kinda doubled it and made it nearly 2,000, and for some that seems like a small milestone, but to me, it means the world. Hearing everyone's thoughts on a video I was unsure was going to make sense to anyone but me, and hearing people's stories and kind words and recommendations based off of the video was just so euphoric to see. And I just want to say from the bottom of my soul, thank you all so much for stopping on by, and I am incredibly grateful you're here. Genuinely, thank you. Outside of video making, been watching Dandadan's new season. It's great. Takapi's Original Sin was something I never thought would be adapted, but it is, and it's great as well. And I started ReZero after so many people recommended it to me, and so far, it is the exact culmination of everything I was trying to say in that video. Really enjoying my time with it so far. Thank you guys. Been playing through Clair Obscur Expedition 33, as you could probably tell with the few clips I sprinkled into this video. On Act 3, and guys, this is already Game of the Year for me, but it might just be one of the best RPGs we will ever see released in our lifetime. Outside of that, how are you all doing? I hope you guys are doing well. Let me know what you've all been up to and what's new in your world. Got any recommendations for stuff? Throw them at me, man. All that said, I'm out of here. Take care of others, and I will see you all next time. 儚く強強世界を君のただいま持つから儚く強強世界を君のただいま持つから儚く強強世界を君のただいま負け Okay.